Hello and welcome to Cinema of Blood. My name is John, and today 50 Years of Horror Movies continues with 5 movies from the year 1992. That being said, let's go ahead and get this started, alright? So, the first movie we're going to talk about is Army of Darkness. Now, Army of Darkness is the third movie in the Evil Dead trilogy. It is directed by Sam Raimi. It was written by Sam Raimi and Ivan Raimi, and it stars once again Bruce Campbell as our hero, Ashley J. Williams, S-Mart employee and Deadite killer. And it also stars Embeth Davids. Now, if you don't know what a Deadite is, then you need to go back and you need to watch the first 2 Evil Dead movies, and you will be introduced to the Deadites, all right? So, the difference about Army of Darkness is that Ash is transported back in time to the 12th century, I believe it is. And it is quite the shock for him, but I think it is more of a shock for the people living in that century than it is for Ash himself, because if you've watched an Evil Dead movie, you know that Ash is Ash. He's a smart ass. He's a confident smart ass. All right. And he is, like I said, he is a killer of Deadites, and that's exactly what he does in the 12th century, the same way he does in the 20th century, as he kills Deadites, except this time there is a whole army of Deadites that Ash and the rest of these primitive screwheads, as he calls them, have to face. All right, so that is the premise, the plot, or whatever you want to call it, of Army of Darkness. There's definitely a lot more comedy to this particular installment of the Evil Dead, which that kind of started with the second Evil Dead. The first one was pretty much straight up horror, and then the second Evil Dead movie, Dead by Dawn, it kind of incorporated more humor into it, and then the third one, you could almost call the third one comedy horror as opposed to horror comedy, but that does not take away from it. It's just a fun film to watch, so if you ever get a chance, check it out. Anyway, Army of Darkness. Okay, all right, next up. Now over here, this movie, the original title for this movie is Brain Dead. Here in America, I have only seen it, and the way I own it, it is known as Dead Alive. So we're going to be talking about Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive. Cue the picture to pop up right about now. There we go. All right, so this is directed by Peter Jackson. The story is by Stephen Sinclair, and the screenplay is by Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson. And when I say Peter Jackson, I mean, yes, that Peter Jackson. The same Peter Jackson who directed all of the Lord of the Rings movies, directed all of the Hobbit movies. In other words, basically fantasy movies, has directed a movie called Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive, and it is one of the goriest horror movies you're probably ever going to see. All right, so what is this movie about? It stars Timothy Balm, Diane, Penalver, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I apologize if I'm not, and Elizabeth Moody, all right? So what is it about? It is about this fellow, I believe his name is Lionel. I'm thinking it's Lionel. Lionel is a mama's boy. And when you meet his mother, you kind of get an idea as to why, because she is an overbearing, domineering, she's a Karen before Karens existed type of woman. And she has her foot solely on the neck of Lionel. She rules him pretty much with an iron fist. Well, one day they are at the zoo, and his mom is bitten by a Sumatran rat monkey. Now, if you watch the I think the 2005 King Kong, also directed by Peter Jackson, the scene on board the boat, you'll see a cage that has a sign that says Sumatran rat monkey, so a little homage to Dead Alive there. Anyway, she is bitten, and this thing becomes infected. It gets nasty. Well, Mom is the type that she loves to entertain, and she invites the men, ladies and gentlemen from one of her many clubs, and they come over and they have dinner, and everybody else gets infected, and they become these undead or dead alive, if you want to say, zombies. All right, and Lionel is faced with the task of, first of all, kind of trying to contain these zombies, and then trying to basically get rid of these zombies, and they keep growing and growing and growing in number. And I will just say this much, just lawnmower zombies, all right? Just put it that way. He modifies a lawnmower and plows through these zombies. You can imagine what this is like. There's also a priest who comes in to help him with the wonderful line, I kick ass for the Lord, you know, that line. So yeah, that is Dead Alive, and it lives up to the hype. It is one of the goriest movies, and I just think it's hilarious seeing that Peter Jackson went on to direct something like the Lord of the Rings trilogies and Hobbit trilogy, and then beforehand directed something like Dead Alive or Brain Dead, whichever one you want to call it. So that is Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive, all right? Okay, next up we've got Bram Stoker's Dracula, all right? And this is directed by directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The screenplay is by James V. Hart, and it, of course, is based on the novel by Bram Stoker. And it stars Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins, Keanu Reeves, and Winona Ryder. And it is pretty much a retelling or telling of the Dracula novel, with Gary Oldman playing Dracula. And he actually, I think next to Christopher Lee, he may actually be probably the greatest Dracula. I absolutely love Oldman's performance in this movie. I love this movie in general. I thought the casting was great. I mean, yeah, a lot of people complain about Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, and he is a little bit wooden in certain scenes, but just the other characterizations alone, Winona Ryder, Sadie Frost as Lucy, you have Carrie Elwes, Bill Pullman, I think his name is, or no, Bill Campbell, the guy that played the Rocketeer. He plays Quincy Morris. But it's Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman that pretty much steal this movie from everybody else. The sets are fantastic in this. The cinematography is fantastic. There are a couple of scenes where Dracula, he's moving, but his shadow is moving independently. I thought that was wonderful how they pulled that off. And most of the stuff is practical effects. In fact, I think all of it is pretty much practical. I may be wrong, but I think it is. And there's a rumor, or supposedly there's a scene where Oldman, before the scene, he says something to each one of his co-stars that are in the scene. And nobody knows what he said, but it terrified them. All right? So yeah, you know, there's not much to talk about with the plot. It is, like I said, it is based on the novel Dracula. It's a wonderful movie. If you've never seen Bram Stoker's Dracula, by all means, check it out. Just as soon as you can, all right? So anyway, that is it. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Next up, we have got Candyman. 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 No, I'm not even going to do it. Anyway, Candyman is directed by Bernard Rose. It is written by Bernard Rose. It is based on the short story The Forbidden by Clive Barker. It stars Tony Todd, Virginia Madsen, Cassie Lemons. So what is Candyman about? Candyman is about a student played by Virginia Madsen, and she is doing like a thesis on I can't remember what it's exactly called, but anyway, she goes to this slum tenement called Cabrini Green. It takes place in Chicago, and that is where she encounters the legend of the Candyman. The Candyman is, like I said, he's played by Tony Todd. He is this tall, statuesque African-American gentleman, wears this long coat, and he has a hook for a hand, and he will use that hook to split you, as he says, from groin to gullet. When I first saw this movie, the one thing that scared me the most about this movie was not so much Candyman himself, but just some of the scenes in this movie are so atmospherically frightening, you know, that it just terrified me. Then, of course, when Candyman himself shows up, that's even more terrifying. And the one thing, I saw the remake. I hated the remake. And the main reason I hated the remake is because it just did not have the charm, I don't know, for one thing about it, the original Candyman had these wonderful quotes from Candyman himself, like, you know, he says something along the lines that he says, they will say that I have shed innocent blood. What's blood for if not for shedding? You know, and other quotes, I mean, pretty much up there with Pinhead and his quotes that he would say in the original Hellraiser. And the remake just didn't have that. I hated the remake. I'm sorry. I know maybe some people didn't hate it, but I did. Anyway, that is pretty much the premise of Candyman, is that this college student encounters this legend, and the legend is all too real, and it wants her to be his next victim. As he says, be my victim. All right. So that is Candyman, and we're moving on to our last movie, and our last movie is Innocent Blood, and this is directed by John Landis. The screenplay is by Michael Wolk. It stars Anne Perriod, Anthony LaPaglia, and Robert Loggia. So you had American Werewolf in London. So you had John Landis doing an American Werewolf in London. So he's done his werewolf movie. So now it's time for him to do his vampire movie. And the results are less successful than an American Werewolf in London. Basically what it's about is a vampire played by Anne Perriod. She's kind of got a moral code, and she only feeds on bad guys. And it's set in Pittsburgh, and she goes up against these mob guys led by this mob boss played by Robert Loggia, and he gets turned into a vampire, and he's going to start his own vampire mafia syndicate, or whatever you call it. So she's got to try to stop him. Meanwhile, you got Anthony LaPaglia as an undercover cop, and he gets caught up in this whole thing with her and with Robert Loggia's character. Like I said, the results on this one are very mixed. I mean, some of the jokes are fine. It does use a lot of comedy. Some of the jokes are fine, then other ones just fall flat. And the overall pacing of this movie just kind of, yeah, it just doesn't necessarily work. It just shifts tones a little bit too many times. All right, so, and you could basically call this The Vampire Meets Goodfellas, if you want to call it that, because that's basically what it tries to be. And it just kind of fails at doing that. All right. Anyway, that is going to do it. That is 5 horror movies from the year 1992. Thank you guys for watching, and take care and stay scared. Bye-bye.